Welcome to You've Got This with Sarah Hamaker, a podcast to encourage and equip moms along their parenting journey. Join Sarah each week as she interviews dads and moms like you and discusses the joys, challenges, and rewards of raising kids.
Hi, and welcome to this week's You've Got This. I'm your host, Sarah Hamaker, and I'm delighted you joined me. Today I have with me Mary Kaarto. She is an award-winning editor and former freelance writer. She's also a mom and a grandmother, and she's written a book about being a grandmother. And before we started recording this, we were just talking about how things have changed since she became a mom. And so I think you're going to enjoy our conversation today. So welcome, Mary.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
So I found that interesting that you were talking a little bit about how, kids are still kids. That really hasn't changed. Kids are still going to do weird things. Kids are still going to do amazing things. The basic kid has not changed. But as we were discussing earlier, there's more going on in the world today than there was when I was a kid, when you were a kid, or when you were raising your daughter. And I find that, as my listeners know, I have 4 children of my own. Between the ages of 11 and 17 now. And, I've had to deal with some things that my mom didn't have to deal with.
Absolutely.
Do you find that? Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yes, I was just, as we were talking about, the world itself has changed since my daughter, she's now 37, and, my heart just goes out to parents of kids of all ages today. You've got school shooting, you've got online bullying, you've got young teenage girls wanting to have plastic surgery because they're looking at Instagram and comparing themselves to others. You've got, gender identity issues. You've got post-traumatic stress disorder. You've got school shootings. You've got separation anxiety. You've got, divorce has been around for a long time, but I never thought to consider how does the child feel having to go from one parent's house to the next, back and forth, and what happens when they don't want to go to the other parent's house, but they still have to. I just, and my heart really goes out to parents today.
Yeah, and I think that one of the struggles today is the glut of information out there. Many of the parents that I help, they're like, look, I read all this stuff and I don't know what to do with it.
Right.
And I think that is part of it. And we have access to so much information. It can be overwhelming to try to parse it through. So do you have any advice as a grandmother, having done this and I know you said you were starting to work on a book about parenting for the 2020s. How do you kind of figure out how to navigate through all that information out there?
Well, I am a retired editor by trade, and so my nickname is News Girl because mm-hmm. I read a lot. I read a lot of different publications. I watch the news a lot. I was just as part of my research for my new book, I just came across this new information about an app called Facetune. Like, instead of Facebook, it's Facetune, where kids of any age, but it's mostly used by young girls, they can take a photograph of themselves and automatically, it's kind of like Photoshop, but it's a lot easier, and they can make their lips fuller, their hips smaller, big, they can make their little faces look however they want and then post it on Instagram. And that's like a self-esteem issue, and yet what happens is all these other little girls of any, and little, even up to 18, 21, 25, they see these pictures and they think they're real, and they try to do the same thing, and it's like, what are we teaching these kids? And so my daughter will be the first to tell you I am sending her all kinds of information I read because I care about my grandkids, obviously, and I also want to help her be aware of just what's out there. And the one thing I can recommend parents to do is set up a Google alert. It's free, and you can put in like child internet safety, internet safety tools, things like that. And so you'll automatically get an email with articles based on whatever topic you want to help you stay on top of things. And that's what I'm doing, and that's how I'm able to pass on a lot of information to my daughter. But I'm sure you've heard of Snapchat and what's I think it's called WhatsApp. And there's an app where a kid can just post something and then it goes away within like 60 seconds or something, so there's no paper trail. Parents need to keep on top of these things because chances are the kids know more about these apps than we do, and grandparents do. So it's really scary.
Yeah, but I think what I'm kind of hearing and what you're saying is that we really need to make sure that we're having conversations with our kids.
Yes.
Not on a lecture, here's what you need to know, but on a, hey, what's going on? You hear them laughing. I have 2 teenage daughters, and, I hear them laughing about something. I'm like, what do you see? I kind of let them invite me into their world. And so they'll say, hey, Mom, look at this. Look at someone who posted on Instagram. Look at, so they'll share those things with me, not constantly, but enough that they know I'm interested.
Absolutely.
I'm not checking up on them, but they know that, their computers are in the main room. Nobody takes the devices into their room. We're like, you got to be open with it. We're not going to be constantly checking, but you need to know that we could.
Right, and I know that there are some sort of online safety measures that parents can purchase, software programs that they can purchase to not only monitor through kind of like a secret back door what their kids are up to online, but also it limits their ability to have access to the online devices. I think that's something that's also really important. And I was talking to a child therapist the other day as part of research for my book, and they had a really good suggestion. When you're concerned about something regarding your child of any age, rather than put them on the defensive, let's say your child of any age is participating in a behavior that is not good for them, rather than put them on the defensive, hey, I saw you doing this, I heard, whatever, you can gently say, help me understand why you said this or did this or thought this, whatever. Help me understand. That was the language she recommended parents using, because you're not putting them on the defensive, so they're more open. You're not letting them know, hey, this is so not okay. I am so PO'd at you. Help me understand why. That's a very gentle approach, and it invites the child into conversation with you that helps them think, okay, I'm not going to get nailed. I'm going to trust my parents, not going to blow a gasket. And they're going to tell, they might have, feel safer in telling you. And then you can have a good conversation about whatever the situation may be.
Yeah, that's really good advice. And it's also all about, like you said, keeping up with what's going on and keeping that dialogue open with our kids. But now let's switch topics just a little bit. I know you love being a grandmother.
Oh, totally.
So I'm looking forward to that many years in the future.
You have so much to look forward to.
Yeah. So, but is being a grandparent different? I feel that, my parents were a little older when they had me, so I didn't have much interaction with my grandparents simply because, most of them weren't around. I mean, they had already died. What do you feel is kind of different? Think back to your own relationship with maybe your grandparents. How are you a different grandparent? How do you see your friends, being different grandparents these days?
Well, thank you for asking that. I only had one grandparent that was alive when I was growing up, and she actually passed away when I was 9. So while I have fond memories of her, there are very few and far between.
Yes. Yeah.
I will say that being a grandmother is a whole lot more fun than being a mother because you have the fun and the joy without the ultimate, you hear all the time, you can send them back to the parents.
Yep.
That's so true. But the opposite side of that is I am living in a world where it's so much different than what it was when I was raising my daughter. I thought it was bad when I was raising my daughter. I was a single mom for almost 20 years. I thought it was bad. The world was bad then, but pales in comparison to what it is now. So if anything, it's like mother load times 100 being a grandmother as far as being concerned about the welfare of my grandkids. It's also really difficult. I know my daughter's not going to listen to this, so I can say this, but it's super difficult for me when I see my daughter, what I think is making mistakes or what and it's really hard to know when to open my mouth and when to keep it shut because, I have to remember, I always say they're my kids. The kids, they're not my kids. They're my grandkids. Right. And so it's really hard. Grandparents, it's very hard for us to know when to keep our mouth open and when to keep it shut, at least for me. I value my relationship with my daughter so much, and we have a really good relationship. I respect her tenfold, and not everybody has been blessed to have the kind of relationship she and I have. And so she knows when I speak up, it's important. It is big time important, and she listens to me. So that there's value in keeping your mouth shut and also, knowing when to speak up. And for the moms and dads that are listening to this, please listen to your parents. If they might be open to listening to your parents, even at I know you're an adult and they're your kids, but I would like to think all parents have the child's and the grandkids' best interest at heart. And so...
Yeah, and I think another thing that we're hearing about a lot more recently is grandparents raising their grandkids.
Yes.
Because of I know they a lot of the news articles and podcasts and TV programs cite the opiate epidemic as kind of fueling that. And I know that must be very hard on grandparents to raise kids as parents as opposed to as a grandparent. I think that adds another layer to the whole being a grandparent today.
Oh, totally. And it's not just opioids. I want to talk about alcohol. Alcohol is one of the most highly addictive substances on the planet. And this mommy wine culture, everywhere you look, it's not drinking alone if the kids are home. That's not funny, and I've interviewed a lot of moms who have lost custody of their kids because they've gone to jail from drinking. Well, you know what? God bless them. The way the world throws alcohol and promotes alcohol is just the fun thing, yoga and wine. I mean, the alcohol industry is teaching mothers, you can't raise those kids. You need alcohol. You poor thing. It's too hard. It's not too hard. And it really breaks my heart to hear these moms crying. They've lost their kids, they've lost their marriages because of alcohol. And just 2 days ago, I read Jessica Simpson, I think. There was an article. She got to where she was drinking in the morning before her kids got up, and she couldn't dress her kids for Halloween one year, and that's when she quit drinking. It's like, so anyway, it's not just that. And so, yeah, when, the moms are thrown in jail and the husbands have divorced them, the kids go to the grandparents. And, grandparents were grandparents. Our health is failing. Yep. And it's so sad. The kids are being left behind. And it's unfair. It's unfair to the kids more than anybody else. It's unfair to the kids.
Yeah, and I think it, just like you said, adds a whole different layer to being a grandparent and wanting to, you've done the hard work of raising your kids and now having to, perhaps help with your grandkids. I know I have a cousin who's doing that with his daughter's kids. They're raising them, and I know many other stories about that. And I just think it's, and on the one hand, I think it's good because, kids deserve to be with their families, if at all possible, to have that family. But I recognize that it is hard, and it makes, so parenting is looking a little different in some, a lot more families because of the age of the caregivers on that. So, and I know that we're almost out of time, and I know you've written a book. So here you go. Here's your 30 seconds to say, what is your book? And
what is my book?
Yeah, what is your book that you have out now?
Thank you. It's called Grandmas and Grandkids, Legacies of Love and Wisdom. And I wrote it. I interviewed women of all ages. I interviewed women who are grandmothers about being a grandma. And then I interviewed women about their grandmas. And then I interviewed little kids, ages 10 and under, on what it means to be a grandma. I mean, it's a book that honors women of all ages and the special, unique bond between grandmas and their grandkids. And I will say that the drawing on the cover was done by my granddaughter when she was 4 years old. She just turned 13 in November, and if you could have seen the look on her face at Christmas when I gave her the book, a copy of the book, she was blown away. She was blown away.
That's so sweet. That's so sweet, Mary, and that's a great way to end our show today. So thank you for being my guest today.
You're so welcome. Thank you for having me.
You've been listening to You Got This. I'm your host, Sarah Hammaker, and I'm glad you joined me today. I've been talking with Mary Kaarto. She's a retired editor and writer, and she also is the world's mom to of the world's best grandkids. So you can check out more about Mary and the links associated with this with this podcast, and we'll see you next week.
Thanks for listening to this week's podcast of You've Got This with Sarah Hammaker. Sign up to receive notification of new podcasts and listen to previous editions at sarahhammaker.com. Until next time, remember, parenting might be hard sometimes, but don't worry, you've got this.